Hello, my name is Chris Woodpan. I'm the owner of Ink & Film Studios, and I am working with Hero Time to make a bunch of videos to help you get your products ready for print. This episode, we're going to talk about importing things into Illustrator. Illustrator tends to be where I finalize my stuff because it allows me to bring things in, easily draw all the die lines I may need, organize things, and then work within that program to get everything just ready for print. Now, how you do this is pretty simple on the surface. So let's just take that example of the train that we imported from Illustrator into Photoshop. Well, let's bring it back and see what things look like. Now, the easiest way to do that is going to be just to simply drag and drop. Drag my two train, drop it in here, and you can see the new graphic is in here in Illustrator. Now, the other thing to note is that this is actually a linked object, meaning this image is a placeholder for the Photoshop image. So if I blow it up too big, it will not print effectively. So be sure that you are keeping your sizes consistent and that you understand the limitation of the sizes within the object. Illustrator is going to play with the resolution a little bit, but as long as you understand that this is an image that's designed to be 3 inches by 2 inches, you'll be okay. But if I try to make it this big, it's not going to work and it's going to start to pixelate out. So be sure that the images you are using are the correct size when they come into Illustrator. So now I have this image here, and I can make multiple copies if I'd like, because maybe I need multiple of these cards and I can just kind of put them around. So up at the top there are two options that you want to pay attention to. Number one is the embed, and number two is the edit in Photoshop. Edit in Photoshop allows me to go back in, open up the original, and then I can say edit it. So here in the Photoshop image, let's say I want to put the number 5 right there in the middle of the engine. I'm just going to change it every single time in the drawing. I'm going to Control S to save, and then I'll go back to my Illustrator document. Now it wants me to update it. I hit yes. And now we can see that all of the images have been updated with the new file. So kind of like we talked about in the last video, it's good to link to the original file, because then if that changes, then those changes will be affected at every instance that you have that object in your document. When you're all done and you're ready to send it to the printer, the best thing to do is click on the image and then hit embed. And then what that will do is that will bring up this dialog that says, how do you want to handle this? Just say flatten it into a single image. And then now that is a graphic element inside the actual photo. So if I no longer have the option to go back into Photoshop and edit, and if I make those changes, I won't be able to. But I also don't have to send the Photoshop file to the printer with the original. So understand that embedding kind of gives me that ability to lock it in once I'm done all my edits and I'm getting everything ready. Now, remember that spaghetti from the other episode? Let's look at that again. So here we have this box, and if I do my Control Y trick, you can see that there is so much data and information that's really just related to the texture and the gradient. This is what we call a lot of mesh gradients. And this is going to be making your file sizes large. It's going to make them confusing. So try not to do this with your images. So how am I going to fix this? Well, if I look down here on this file, I have my guides on a separate layer. I'm going to get rid of them. And what I'm going to do is just select that one layer that has all of this background on it. And down here, you see this little arrow with the little box on it. I'm going to collect that for export. And then what's going to happen is it's going to take that and it's going to gather it together for an export. Down here are my export settings. We're going to cover this all in the future. But if I export it, it's going to save it. So I'm going to import it back in. And this is what's going to happen. I have two artboards here. This one on the left is the original file that was created in Illustrator, and the one on the right is the one that I just made and imported. Now, if I Control Y, can you see the difference between the two? This has all the data, this has none. So if I turn off that front, you can see that this has been reduced to just graphic information. It's no longer a vector file, which means I can't scale it like I used to, but it really cleans up the file and helps reduce the file size. And it's super, super important. So importing can even happen within Illustrator itself. So maybe you make a new document and you just rebuild your file that you're making this box with, and then put your images on top and call it a day. This will make your life a lot easier rather than having those gradients. And you can see more about that Control Y video and why that's so handy. So I hope you found that helpful, and it's important to kind of run through a couple of those steps real quick. Number one is when you import a Photoshop document or any graphical document, be sure to understand what the resolution is of that image. That's not really apparent in Illustrator, so you need to have good discipline and know how big things are. Use the rulers if you need to. The other thing you need to be made aware of is that when you bring it in, it's a link to the original. And if you update that original, it will update automatically. You will need to stop that when you go to export that, so be sure to embed the file at that point when you're done making all the changes. And then last but not least is don't forget that Control Y thing. That can really help export within Illustrator itself and then bring it right back in. You can take it over to Photoshop, tweak it some more, and then bring it back in. But that's going to be very helpful in helping you reduce file size and also reduce confusion on the back end. It'll make your files much, much easier to work with once you get those desired effects. So I hope you found that helpful. Thank you so much for watching this episode. We're going to deep dive into exporting and getting your files ready for print in the last few episodes, and I hope you'll join us then. So see you then.